All right, last segment here with Miller Thomas. Uh, we talked about the future with the future pennant races. We talked about the present with some of the teams sliding. Let's talk a little bit about the past. We had a great Hall of
Oh,
Fame weekend, and that's to me, I mean, I'm not intensely emotionally quivering my bottom lip over Fred McGriff and Scott Rowland. That being said, they were both wonderful players. I saw their entire careers. I've always felt Fred McGriff was probably the most underappreciated of the sluggers of his time. He wasn't hitting the 60 home runs. It just every year, 35, 40, 35, 37, 30, like every year, Fred McGriff, whether it was the 80s, 90s, 2000s, he was just a consistent crusher of homers. And oh my goodness, his body didn't suddenly change, or he didn't suddenly become a 70 home run hitter in his 40s. I'll just leave that one right there. And hit was part of some, playing the postseason with a bunch of teams, was part of, I think, the single best team to not win a pennant, which was the Blue Jays of the late 80s, early 90s. Yes, I know the Blue Jays wound up winning the World Series in 92 and 93, but McGriff was part of one of the biggest massive blockbuster trades of two All-Stars in exchange for two All-Stars. Fred McGriff and Tony Fernandez for Roberto Alomar and Joe Carter. I mean, that's a trade you don't see anymore. That's a trade you make on So Rare, and that was and that when
all
that
that.
trade happened, it's like, holy what? And but yeah, his arrival on the Braves in 1993 just turned them into a juggernaut. He hit a home run in his first World Series at bat in the World Series against Cleveland in 1995. All class. No one on the planet has a bad word to say about Fred McGriff. And so I'm glad he's in. Scott Rowland's one of the great third basemen in the history of baseball. I have no compunction saying that. Had a super long career, World Series champion, playoff hero, almost hit one of the greatest home runs in the history of the Cincinnati Reds, where he hit a long drive to left field that if it stayed fair, the Reds would have won the division series it would have been a series clinching home run that hooked foul, and the Reds wound up losing the series to the Giants, and the Giants wound up winning the World Series that year. Take that, Jeff Carr, that memory of how close you came, a Scott Rowland foul ball away from going to the NLCS in 2012. But yeah, those are two legit Hall of Famers,
Okay,
and
that
and I
that's
and I like that they're both in. I would have voted for both of them.
okay. That's kind of my question about the legitness of this Hall of Fame, because I always wonder when a guy's like on a ballot for like 5, 6, 7 years and then they finally make it. Does that really validate their career of being a Hall of Famer, or does it need to be a little bit more strict? Because I do see some people have some complaints about the Scott Rowlands, where it's like maybe he was a great player, but was he that Hall of Fame player? Did you fear a Scott
I
Rowlands when
did.
you
I
rolled him?
I understand what you're saying, and I understand. I think that this is magnified because some of the superstars who have been on the ballot have been left off, and he's been put on. I think the fact that the Bonzes and the Clemenses and the A-Rods and the Manny Ramirez's and the Rafael Palmeiros of the world who have the stats and the legitimacy and the superstarness of baseball are left out, and Scott Rowland is left in. And Scott Rowland didn't capture the imagination of the baseball going public the way. I think he is part of a backlash for people who say, "What? A-Rod's not in and Rowland is."
Yeah.
Bonds is, I mean, it's sad to me because I do think Rowland's a legit Hall of Famer. I just think that when people start comparing to some of the people who've been left off, I think that's where this backlash may have come about. And I'm so, in a way, I'm so mad that Harold Baines got into the Hall of Fame for this reason, because people will now talk about his career as if he was a bad player. He wasn't. He obviously had a wonderful career.
Hmm.
He played for 20 some odd years. He got 2,800 some odd hits, was an all-star many times over. He was a terrific second banana on many teams. A professional player, professional hitter. No one has a bad thing in the world to say about him. But when he got in, he got like 5% of the vote from the writers, and Tony La Russa was sitting on the committee and he was Baines's manager, and so he got the groundswell of that committee to put him in because he's a hell of a nice guy. And so now people talk about Baines and to a lesser degree Rolen as if they didn't have, Rolen I think has a Hall of Fame worthy career. I don't think Baines did. And I'm not mad that he's in. I'm mad that him being in he's now going to be, people will bring him up and also bring up Bonds in the same breath. That's the thing that's annoying.
Yeah. The politics of the Hall of Fame voting has always bothered me when it comes to people putting their own personal biases and injecting their own personal feelings into the voting. Just tell me if you think that guy's a Hall of Fame player or not. And one guy that I was comparing Scott Rowland to, who I was comparing him to a dude who just had his final year on the ballot this past season, who didn't make it. He had 10 years on the ballot and got knocked off, but he was a former MVP. And just comparing their stats side to side, I thought it was really close, but I was surprised this guy got cut from the ballot while Rowland made it. Jeff Kent, I'm not saying I'm a big Jeff Kent supporter or anything like that, but just if you put the two guys side by side, statistically, they're damn near the same. And then Jeff Kent's got that little MVP. I don't know too much about his own career, but I'm just like, why is a guy like Scott Rowland? Is it that much of a difference between Scott Rowland and the next guy, even though statistically they look the same?
I was never the biggest Jeff Kent guy in the world. I think he benefited from Bonds. I think his career exploded when he was protected. They had to throw him a strike because they just walked Bonds. But there's also, I think everyone hated Jeff Kent. And I wonder how, and no one hated Scott Rowland. I do think that comes into play. I think that comes into play big time. I remember someone was accusing Jeff Kent of treating players of color in a nasty way. And someone pointed out, said, like, no, he was an a-hole to everybody. He did not care your race, color, or creed. He just was a jerk to the entire planet Earth. And I don't recall a single person ever say anything nice about Jeff Kent as a human being. And I wonder how much of that bowls over. And I have said that the sanctimonious attitude about performance enhancing drugs and Hall of Famers. And by the way, I'm not getting into the Pete Rose thing because I did a whole episode on that. He doesn't want to be in the Hall of Fame. So quit asking if he's going to be in. He's answered your question. He doesn't want to be in. He wants to make money out of not being a Hall of Famer. But that's a previous episode. Go check that out. I'll probably make a video short of that so you can just share that with your loved ones over the breakfast nook. But for the ones who are PED users, that they are like the Bonds, Clemens, and of course Clemens has a whole new set of baggage he has to deal with off-field, accusations and everything like that. I'm putting that aside. Bonds, Clemens, Alex Rodriguez, Manny Ramirez, Rafael Palmeiro, all of them have the numbers to be in. We know Pudge Rodriguez was part of the Mitchell report. We know David Ortiz had a positive test. Jeff Bagwell is the most obvious user in the history of anything. But everyone liked them. Everyone liked Big Papi. Everyone liked Pudge Rodriguez. Everyone liked what was the last one? Jeff Bagwell. They were nice, cute, cuddly guys. But people didn't like A-Rod. People didn't like Clemens. People didn't like Bonds. People didn't like Palmeiro after he did the whole finger wagging thing. People thought McGwire was full of you-know-what. Sammy Sosa should be in the Hall of Fame. Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa saved freaking baseball.
Yes.
They belong in the Hall of Fame.
Great.
Barry Bonds belongs. They should build a tower for Barry Bonds. If you want to say, and do you know what? If you're going to be sanctimonious about it, do you know what? Put on this plaque, only put the information up until 1997. Because guess what? You could say the first person in baseball history to get 400 home runs and 400 stolen bases, multiple MVP winner. How about that? But it's the sanctimoniousness about it, which brings up some of the ones coming up in the upcoming ballot.
Oh, wait, real quick.
A-Rod's still on the ballot. He should be in. He's the greatest third baseman in the history of the Yankees. And when people say, was Derek Jeter the greatest shortstop of all time? He wasn't the best shortstop on his own infield. What were you going to say?
I was just gonna say, because you're hosting Locked On Rockies this week, I was just gonna say, just for next year, because the guy who came in second to Sky Rowling for the most votes this year was Todd
Oh,
Helton.
Helton, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's probably a lock to
Oh,
get
he's a
that
lock.
little bump. Yeah,
And
get that
by the
little
way,
bump.
on Tuesday's show at Locked on Rockies, I talk about Todd Helton's candidacy and the fact that the first Rocky to get into the Hall of Fame, even anyone who played the game, was Larry Walker, and I'm glad it was Larry Walker and not like Dale Murphy, who played a handful of games at the end of his career with the Rocks, but was a Brave. I would love to see friend of the podcast Dale Murphy on there, but anyway. But Todd Helton is definitely going to get in the Hall of Fame, and he should be.
Yeah.
He had a Hall of Fame career.
And just real quick, my feeling, I've talked about it a bunch on the podcast. Whenever the Hall of Fame season rolls around, they got to drudge up the same arguments about why you're pro or against the steroid users. Mine is always just a real simple philosophy. I'm pro with any steroid user up until 2004, up until the Mitchell report, because basically there was no testing. Baseball didn't care. After 2004, I do care if you did steroids, because at that point, baseball did crack down. We did have this kind of black cloud over anyone who did steroids. And after that point, when we're actually policing it, when we actually have rules in place, if after 2006 you did get caught with steroids, then I'm like, okay, I do look at you kind of shady. So if like Nelson Cruz gets on the ballot, then I might be like, you know what? He did do steroids in the prime of his career. That might knock him down from you.
All right, well, let me ask you this then. And I understand that. I respect that. But like Alex Rodriguez was a Hall of Famer before the crackdown started. Manny Ramirez was.
Yeah.
Rafael Palmeiro was. Gary Sheffield was. Gary Sheffield had a great career. Had a phenomenal career for years. And it wasn't all just because he was injecting horse serum into his buttocks. I mean,
when it comes to like the Mannies and the A-Rods, I think it's the multiple allegations and the failed testings and the biogenesis scandal. If it was a one-time thing,
David Ortiz, and I'm the biggest Big Papi fan you'll ever meet. But for God's sake, same with Pudge Rodriguez.
But all David Ortiz has is the Mitchell report, which baseball has thrown out. We have other instances post Mitchell report, Manny's and the A-Rods. That's why I'm like, it's a little bit different. If you're Manny and you fail like 3 times in your Major League career, that feels a little different to me than one time on a test where Major League Baseball themselves don't even give it any credence.
Do you put Manny in?
I love Manny. Personally, I mean, I grew up as a Red Sox fan. So Manny being Manny, I'm putting him in. But
you put A-Rod in.
See, A-Rod is where it gets a little dicey.
The greatest third baseman in Yankee history. I mean, don't throw Greg Nettles in my face.
With the same logic, I would have to put A-Rod in as well. But I think personally, I wouldn't actually have either one of them. And just because you can't fail so many tests and have steroids delivered to your house, you have to have some kind of ground rules here. We can't just let in all the cheaters.
Okay.
Post Mitchell report.
What about these 3?
Uh-oh.
Well, okay. These 5.
Okay. We got 5 names.
Clemens.
Yes? You want me to say yes or no?
Yes or no?
I got Clemens in there.
Okay. Me too. Bonds.
I'm pro.
Bonds. Okay. Palmeiro.
I would have to check the numbers.
3,000 hits, 500 home runs.
Well, then, yeah. If he did his work pre-04 Mitchell report, if all those guys put up their Hall of Fame numbers pre-Mitchell report, I'm pro any of those guys if they got the Hall of Fame numbers.
Mark McGwire.
Yes, get the juiced up heads in there from the 80s, because that's where I'm like, baseball, like you said, baseball needed those guys. They changed the game. Baseball turned their back. Everyone benefited off the steroids in the 80s, so those guys should go in. But the guys post 04, when we weren't benefiting off steroids, okay.
Sammy Sosa.
Sammy Sosa is an interesting cat off the field. He's got some identity issues, but I guess he could go in the Hall of Fame. I just don't know what color his bust is going to be.
Okay, look at he's doing. I'm not going to touch that one. I am not going to touch that one. His bust will be bronze. That's all I know.
Bleach
all right,
bronze.
There you go. There was one time he showed up and he had like a pink hat and he was wearing a pink suit, and only Superman fans will appreciate this. He looked like Mr. Mxyzptlk from the Superman comics. Anyone who gets that, send me a message at Sully Baseball, because if you do, I'll put him side by side, Mr. Mxyzptlk and how Sammy Sosa came out. All right, cool. But we agree that Todd Helton belongs in, and Adrian Beltre also on the ballot. is a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, looking at next year, are there any guys who are like are no brainers, or are there any guys who you
Helton.
just think are like just really interesting that you don't know where it's gonna go, like a coin flip?
Well, Helton and Adrian Beltre have to be in.
Those are
I
names.
vote for Sheffield. I absolutely have Sheffield in there.
I like that.
Beltran is an interesting case because of his the stink attached to him from the Astros year. The two most interesting cases that I think are worth looking at are Billy Wagner and Andrew Jones.
Mhm.
I can go either way on both of them. I've heard very compelling case on both sides, and thank goodness I don't have a vote. But you have two that are absolute no brainers for next year, which are, so if you're a Ranger fan, if you're a Rocky fan, go reserve your tickets to go to Cooperstown, because Todd Helton is absolutely gonna make it, and also Adrian Beltre.
Yeah, yeah, him too. I don't know if he'll be a first ballot, but Joe Mauer's going to be on the ballot for the first time next year. I think
He's an interesting one. He's interesting. He's one that I think is worth debating over and seeing the pros and cons, especially because of his position.
Yeah, I think because he's a catcher, I'm just looking at his stats. Like, he's led the league in average 3 times. He got the MVP. I think because of the numbers, the two most interesting guys I think for me on this list is because when you think of their primes, it felt like they reached these really high highs, MVP finalists, but their primes actually didn't last longer than like 6 or 7 years in terms of their peak. Both a Chase Utley and a David Wright, both of them kind of dealt with injuries in the second half of their career. More David Wright, but both those guys for like 5 or 6 years, you could say maybe the best players at their position, but their peak wasn't as long as maybe you might have remembered when you go back and look at their stats.
Which is why I bring back Sheffield. Look at how long he was a legitimate MVP, and it wasn't all just steroids. He for all those years with Miami, or they were Florida back then, those years he had where he was the legitimate MVP candidate in San Diego, in Los Angeles. He played some great years with Atlanta, was great with the Yankees. Just he had such a long peak. So take a look. All right, we're getting off piece here. We got to wrap this up here. Hey, let me throw the trivia question that I asked to Locked On Rockies to my audience here. And the question is, when the Rockies had their great year in 2007, where they stunned everybody and went to the World Series, they had only one All-Star representative that year. Who was the Rockies' lone All-Star for the year they went to the World Series in 2007? See if you can get it, and the Rockies fans can get it on Locked On Rockies. Send your answer to @Sully Baseball. Hey, Miller Thomas, where can people follow your show?
Hey, you can follow me on all your streaming platforms. Just type in Locked On Diamondbacks. We're also on YouTube, Locked On Diamondbacks. I'm there as well. Follow my personal Twitter account at CareerThomas24, or look up the show account, Locked On Diamondbacks, both Twitter and Instagram for the show handle.
And you can follow me. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Talking about a wild card race that's mainly wild because of mediocrity at this point, and celebrating the non-mediocre legends. Is that non-mediocre? Is that grammatically? You know what I'm talking about. This is Locked On MLB, Locked On Diamondbacks crossover for the 24th day of July 2023. We're going to fist pump for another week.
Boom.